Namaskar students. Hope you are hale and hearty, taking care of your health and your studies. My name is Jyotsna and I am from Education Department, Chandigarh. 15th August 1947. Every Indian is well aware of this date. India attained its freedom on this very day. The day which came after the struggle of many years, probably centuries would be a right word to say. With so many sacrifices, finally, India was free of all the external rule from Britishers. Attaining sovereignty was the ultimate desire of the citizens of India. But did the story end there? Did everything become excellent from that point onwards? No. Actually, the real struggle began from 15th August 1947. How? Country attained its freedom, but along with that, they got the pain of partition. With Hindu-Muslim communal violence round the corner, the joy was somehow subdued. With so many princely states in different forms and at different places in India, India had to start a new struggle for the unification. Yes, this is the topic for discussion today. We are going to take up chapter number 10 of grade 8, India after Independence, from the book Our Past, part 3. So, let's get going. Less than 6 months after independence, the nation was mourning. On 30 January 1948, Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated by a fanatic, Nathuram Godse, because he disagreed with Gandhiji's conviction that Hindus and Muslims should live together in harmony. That evening, a stunned nation heard Jawaharlal Nehru's moving statement over All India Radio. Friends and comrades, the light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. Our beloved leader, the father of the nation, is no more. Independence brought a new and divided nation. So when India became independent in August 1947, it faced a series of very great challenges. As a result of partition, 8 million refugees had come into the country from what was now Pakistan. These people had to be found homes and jobs. Then there was the problem of the princely states. Almost 500 of them, each ruled by Maharaja or a Nawab, each of them whom had to be persuaded to join the new nation. The problems of the refugees and the princely states had to be addressed immediately. In the longer term, the new nation had to adopt a political system that would best serve the hopes and expectations of its population. India's population in 1947 was large, almost 345 million. It was also divided. There were divisions between high caste and low caste, between the majority Hindu community and Indians who practiced other faiths. The citizens of this vast land spoke many different languages, wore many different kinds of dress, ate different kinds of food, and practiced different professions. How could they be made to live together in one nation state? To the problem of unity was added the problem of development. At independence, the vast majority of Indians lived in the villages. Farmers and peasants depended on the monsoon for their survival. So did the non-farm sector of the rural economy. For if the crops failed, barbers, carpenters, weavers, and other service groups would not get paid for their service either. In the cities,
Factory workers lived in crowded slums with little access to education or healthcare. Clearly, the new nation had to lift its masses out of poverty by increasing the productivity of agriculture and by promoting new job-creating industries. Unity and development had to go hand in hand. If the divisions between different sections of India were not healed, they could result in violent and costly conflicts. High caste fighting with low caste, Hindus with Muslims, and so on. At the same time, if the fruits of economic development did not reach the broad masses of the population, it could create fresh divisions. For example, between the rich and the poor, between cities and the countryside, between regions of India that were prosperous and regions that lagged behind. So what India needed at this point was a very strict policy, and that gave birth to the Constitution. Hence, a constitution was written. So between December 1946 and November 1949, some 300 Indians had a series of meetings on the country's political future. The meetings of this Constituent Assembly were held in New Delhi. But the participants came from all over India and from different political parties. These discussions resulted in framing of Indian Constitution, which came into effect on 26 January 1950. One feature of Constitution was its adoption of universal adult franchise, under which all the Indians above the age of 21 would be allowed to vote in state and national elections. We must keep in mind out here that today, under universal adult franchise, all the Indians above the age of 18 have the right to vote. But when it began, the age was 21. So this was a revolutionary step because never before had Indians been allowed to choose their own leaders. In other countries such as United Kingdom and the United States, this right had been granted in stages. First only men of property had their vote, then men who were educated were also added on. Working class men got the vote only after a long struggle. Finally, after a bitter struggle of their own, American and British women were granted the vote. On the other hand, soon after independence, India chose to grant this right to all its citizens, regardless of gender, class, or education. So the second feature of the Constitution was that it guaranteed equality before the law to all citizens, regardless of their caste or religious affiliations. There were some Indians who wished that the political system of the new nation be based on Hindu ideals and that India itself be run as Hindu state. They pointed to the example of Pakistan, a country created explicitly to protect and further the interests of a particular religious community, of course, the Muslims. However, the Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was of opinion that India could not and must not become a Hindu Pakistan. Besides Muslims, India also had large populations of Sikhs and Christians, as well as many Parsis and Jains. Under the new constitution, they would have the same rights as Hindus, the same opportunities when it came to seeking jobs in government or the private sector, the same rights before the law. And that equality before law made Indian Constitution a unique in itself. The third feature of the Constitution was that it offered special privileges for the poorest and most disadvantaged Indians. The practice of untouchability, described as a slur and a blot on the fair name of India, was abolished. Hindu temples, previously open to only the higher castes, were thrown open to all, including the former untouchables. After a long debate, the Constituent Assembly also recommended that a certain percentage of seats in legislature as well as jobs in government be reserved for members of the lowest castes. It had been argued by some that untouchables, or as they were now known as Harijan, these candidates did not have good enough grades to get into the prestigious Indian administrative service. But as one member of the Constituent Assembly, H. J. Khandekar, argued, it was the upper caste who were responsible for the Harijans being unfit today. Addressing his more privileged colleagues, Khandekar said, We were suppressed for thousands of years. You engaged us in your service to serve your own ends and suppressed us to such an extent that neither our minds nor our bodies and nor even our hearts work, nor are we able to march forward. Along with the former untouchables, the Adivasis or scheduled tribes were also granted reservation in seats and jobs. Like the scheduled castes, these Indians too had been deprived and discriminated against. The tribals had been deprived of modern healthcare and education, while their lands and forests had been taken away by more powerful outsiders. The new privileges granted them by the Constitution were meant to make amends for this. The Constituent Assembly spent many days discussing the powers of the central government versus those of the state government. Some members thought that the center's interest should be foremost. Only a strong center, it was argued, would be in position to think and plan for well-being of the country as a whole. India is called a federal form of government today, in which the powers are equally divided amongst center and the state. And what we are discussing out here focuses on that very feature. So, if we minutely look, that members felt that the provinces should have greater autonomy and freedom. A member from Mysore feared that under the present system, democracy is centered in Delhi and it is not allowed to work in the same sense and spirit in the rest of the country. Somebody from Madras said that the initial responsibility for the well-being of people of the provinces should rest with the provincial governments. The Constitution sought to balance these competing claims by providing 3 lists of subjects. So in Constitution of India, we have 3 lists under which the state government and the central government forms legislation. These 3 are the state list, the union list and the concurrent list. So under the state list of subjects, there were education and health, which would be taken care of principally by the states. Under the concurrent list, we had the subjects like forest and agriculture, in which the center and the states would have joint responsibility. And yes, union list, it came with the topmost priority, that of taxes, defense and foreign affairs, which would be exclusively responsibility of the center. So another major debate in the Constituent Assembly concerned the language. Many members believed that English language should leave India with British rulers. Its place, they argued, should be taken by Hindi. However, those who did not speak Hindi were of different opinion. Like T.T. Krishnamachari conveyed a warning on behalf of people of the South, some of whom threatened to separate from India if Hindi was imposed on them. A compromise was finally arrived, and namely that while Hindi would be official language of India, English would be used in the courts, the services and the communication between one state and another. So many Indians contributed to the framing of the Constitution. But perhaps the most important role was played by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He is also known as the father of the Constitution of India. He was the chairman of the drafting committee and under whose supervision the document was finalized. In his final speech to the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar pointed out that political democracy had to be accompanied by economic and social democracy. Giving the right to vote would not automatically lead to the removal of other inequalities such as between rich and poor or between upper and lower caste. With the new constitution, he said India was going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequalities. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. So, how were the states formed? So, back in 1920s, the Indian National Congress, the main party of freedom struggle, had promised that once the country wins independence, each major linguistic group would have its own province. However, after independence, the Congress did not take any step to honor this promise. for India had been divided on the basis of religion. Despite the wishes and efforts of Mahatma Gandhi, freedom had come not to one nation but to two, that was India and Pakistan. So, as a result of the partition of India, more than 1 million people had been killed in riots between Hindus and Muslims. And could the country afford at that point in time a division on the basis of language? So, both Prime Minister Nehru and Deputy Prime Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel were against the creation of linguistic states. After the partition, Nehru said disruptionist tendencies had come to the fore. To check them, the nation had to be strong and united. Or as Patel put it, the first and the last need of India at the present moment is that it should be made a nation. Everything which helps the growth of nationalism has to go forward, and everything which throws obstacle in its way has to be rejected. We have applied this test to linguistic provinces also, and by this test, in our opinion, they cannot be supported. That the Congress leaders would now go back on their promise created great disappointment. The Kannada speakers, Malayalam speakers, the Marathi speakers had all looked forward to having their own state. The strongest protest, however, came from Telugu-speaking districts of what was Madras Presidency. When Nehru went to campaign there during the general elections of 1952, he was met with black flags and slogans demanding, "We want Andhra." In October of that year, a veteran Gandhian named Poti Sriramulu went on a hunger strike, demanding the formation of Andhra state to protect the interests of Telugu speakers. As the fast went on, it attracted much support. Hartals and bands were observed in many towns. On 15 December 1952, 58 days into his fast, Poti Sriramulu died. As a newspaper put it, the news of the passing away of Sriramulu engulfed entire Andhra in chaos. The protests were so widespread and intense that the central government was forced to give in to the demand. Thus, on 1st October 1953, the new state of Andhra came into being, which subsequently became Andhra Pradesh. After the creation of Andhra, other linguistic communities also demanded their own separate states. A state reorganization commission was set up, which submitted its report in 1956, recommending the redrawing of districts and provincial boundaries to form compact provinces of Assamese, Bengali, Odia, Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada and Telugu speakers respectively. The large Hindi-speaking region of North India was also to be broken up into several states. A little later in 1960, the bilingual state of Bombay was divided into separate states for Marathi and Gujarati speakers. In 1966, the state of Punjab was also divided into Punjab and Haryana, the former for Punjabi speakers, the latter for the rest, who spoke not Punjabi but versions of Haryanvi or Hindi. So after the states were reorganized, the major concern was on to the development, and huge planning was carried out in order to accomplish this motto of development. So lifting India and Indians out of poverty and building a modern technical and industrial base were among the major objectives of the new nation. In 1950, the government set up a planning commission to help design and execute suitable policies for economic development. There was a broad agreement on what was called a mixed economy model. Here, both the state and the private sector would play important and complementary role in increasing production and generating jobs. What specifically these roles were to be, which industries should be initiated by the state and which by the market, how to achieve a balance between the different regions and states was to be defined by the Planning Commission. In 1956, the second 5-year plan was formulated. This focused strongly on the development of heavy industries such as steel, on the building of large dams. These sectors would be under the control of the state. This focus on the heavy industry and the effort at state regulation of the economy would be to guide economic policy for the next few decades. This approach had many strong supporters but also some vocal critics. Some felt that it had put inadequate emphasis on agriculture. Others argued that it had neglected primary education. Still, others believed that it had not taken account of the environmental implications of economic policies. As Mahatma Gandhi's follower, Miraben wrote in 1949, "By science and machinery, he, mankind, may get huge returns for a time, but ultimately will come desolation. We have got to study nature's balance and develop our lives within her laws if we are to survive as a physically healthy and morally decent species." The search for an independent foreign policy. India gained freedom soon after the devastation of the Second World War. At that time, a new international body, the United Nations, formed in 1945, was in its infancy. The 1950s and 1960s saw the emergence of the Cold War. That is, power rivalries and ideological conflicts between the USA and the USSR, with both countries creating military alliances. This was also the period when colonial empires were collapsing and many countries were attaining independence. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who was also the foreign minister of newly independent India, developed Free India's foreign policy in this context. Non-alignment formed the bedrock of this foreign policy, led by the statesmen from Egypt, Yugoslavia, Indonesia, Ghana, and India. The non-aligned movement urged countries not to join either of the two major alliances. But this policy of staying away from the alliances was not a matter of remaining isolated or neutral. The former means remaining aloof from the world affairs, whereas non-aligned countries such as India played an active role in mediating between the American and the Soviet alliances. They tried to prevent war, often taking a humanitarian and moral stand against war. However, for one reason or another, many non-aligned countries, including India, got involved in wars. By the 1970s, a large number of countries had joined the non-aligned movement. So, after this, nation spent another 60 years. On 15th August 2007, India celebrated 60 years of its existence as a free nation. And in 2020, we completed 73 years of our independence. So, at 60, how well has the country done in that time? And to what extent has it fulfilled the ideals set out in its constitution? That India is still united and that it is still democratic. These are the achievements that we might justly be proud of. Many foreign observers had felt that India could not survive as a single country, that it would break up into many parts with each region or linguistic group seeking to form a nation of its own. Others believed that it would come under military rule. However, as many as 13 general elections have been held since independence, which now in 2021 got on to 17 Lok Sabha elections. So, at the age of 60, India had seen 13 general elections. There is a free press as well as an independent judiciary. Finally, the fact that people speak different languages or practice different faiths has not come in the way of national unity. On the other hand, deep divisions persist. Despite unconstitutional guarantees, the untouchables, or as they are now referred to, the Dalits, face violence and discrimination. In many parts of rural India, they are not allowed access to water sources, temples, parks, and other public places. And despite the secular ideals enshrined in the constitution, there have been clashes between different religious groups in many states. Above all, as many observers have noted, the gulf between the rich and poor has grown over the years. Some parts of India and some groups of Indians have benefited a great deal for economic development. They live in large houses and dine in expensive restaurants, send their children to expensive private schools, and take expensive foreign holidays. At the same time, many others continue to live below the poverty line, housed in urban slums or living in remote villages on lands that yield little. They cannot afford to send their children to school. The Constitution recognizes equality before the law, but in real life, some Indians are more equal than others, judged by the standards it set itself at independence. the Republic of India has not been a great success, but it has not been a failure either.
Let's try to analyze what we have learnt out of today's session.
On your screens, you can find certain questions or statements. Along with that, you have 4 options. You have to pick the correct option. So, without wasting any time, let's get going. Dharavi, the largest slum of the world, is situated in Calcutta, Chennai, Delhi or Mumbai. Dharavi, the largest slum of the world, is situated in Mumbai. Very good. The leader who went on hunger strike for Andhra Pradesh to protect the interest of Telugu speakers is Chittaranjan Das, Poti Sri Ramulu, Krishna Menon or none of these. So, the correct option is option B, Poti Sri Ramulu. Moving on, how many Indians formed the Constituent Assembly? 100, 200, 300 or 400? Yes, the correct option is option C, 300 Indians formed the Constituent Assembly. New state of Andhra Pradesh came into being on 1st October 1953, 15th October 1953, 1st May 1953 or 15th May 1953. So the Andhra Pradesh came into being on 1st October 1953. Alright, the United Nations was formed in 1940, 1945, 1947, 1950. The United Nations was formed in 1945. We must keep in mind that United Nations was formed after the end of Second World War in order to make sure that no other war ever comes to the forefront. Alright, India celebrated its 60th year of independence on 15th August 2000, August 15, 2009, January 26, 2000 or January 15, 2005. So India celebrated its 60th year of independence on August 15, 2007. On your screens, you can find 2 different set of columns. You have to match the words given in one column with the words given in the other column. So, Hindu-Pakistan, a partition of India on the basis of religion and dominated by Hindus, called by Nehru. Gandhian, followers of Gandhiji's ideas and actions. Franchise, a right to vote. Mixed economy, in which both private and public sectors take part in production of industries and other spheres. Cold War, the period of power rivalries and ideological conflicts between USA and USSR. Non-alignment, not to side any world power. Alright, let's see if these statements are true or false. At independence, the majority of Indians lived in cities. False. The Constituent Assembly was made up of members of Muslim League. False. In the first national election, only men of age 30 was allowed to vote. False. If you can recall, India was the first one to give universal adult franchise under which every Indian, be it a man or a woman of age 21, had right to vote. So it is a false statement. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. True. The population of India in 1947 was 38 crore. It is a false statement.
We started from scratch. Our journey in last 73 years was full of ups and downs. We still have differences, but we will still fight it out. Because at the end of the day, India on its own had been an example of unity in diversity to the world. With this, we sign off today's session. We'll be back with many more videos. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy and keep learning. Namaskar.